but it's not simulating how that spray affects your visor, and that's where you lose most of the visibility. Oh, oh. Fair play. Oh, what the? Was he on slicks? I used to be terrible at racing in the rain. I'll admit it. I mean, when I first started racing in America, I had maybe driven in the wet once or twice. I mean, even when there were opportunities to drive in the wet, let's say on a test day, it was perfectly acceptable to say, let's not take the risk, let's wait for it to dry out. But then, after winning the F4 championship in the US, I decided to move across the pond to race in British Formula 3, a country infamous for its temperamental weather and dangerously tricky racetracks. But in the months leading up to my first race in British F3, I had a few more opportunities to drive in the wet in testing, but I was shitting myself every time. I mean, it was to the point where I wouldn't even look at weather reports because every time I saw a little rain cloud on my phone, I would just get anxious. And then came my first ever race in British F3 at Oulton Park, where I was on pole after a dominating dry quali lap. And then a few hours passed and it was time for our first race, and in typical British fashion, there was an absolute deluge onto the track. And that meant my first ever standing start in British F3 was going to be in the wet. And I ended up falling back to 5th, where I ultimately finished the race. Believe it or not, in the following years of racing, I had very few outings in the wet, which at the time made me feel really lucky, but in retrospect, it was pretty unlucky. I mean, the lack of wet driving experience was just delaying the learning of a skill that I needed to have to be a well-rounded racing driver. But fast forward to today, and I can confidently say my wet driving is at a very, very high level. And I have the hardware to prove it.
Got him!
So after winning 2 out of the 3 wet races I had last year, I can confidently say I made a huge step in wet driving performance. So this brings me to the topic of wet racing in simulation software. Wet weather driving's been available in various games over the years, but I can assure you none of them have been realistic. However, rFactor 2 has just updated their wet weather physics model, and in their words, it's more realistic. So let's find out just how true that really is. Okay, you join me on the grid for an 8-lap race at Spa. It's wet now, but it's only meant to get wetter. So let's see if we can make our way to the front of the grid. AI is on 100%, so it's not gonna be easy, I can promise you that. Whoa. Wow, they're really shoving me up against the wall. Here we go. Traction's not too bad in first. Oh god. Gonna have to lift here. Wow. Well, the AI aggression is also on 100%, so you can definitely tell. Okay, so far none of the AI are taking any wet lines. They're just basically staying on dry line, which is not realistic, because like staying on this line, for instance, really tight, like in the dry, I mean, it's impossible in the wet. You just have so much grease from the rubber line that it would just spit you right off. Let's see here as well. Are they taking the dry line? Oh, well, he didn't really have a choice there, did he? Okay, we're up into P12. Up 8 places. Oh. All the AI are using this exit curve here, which in real life is not super grippy in the wet. Oh god. We've got some slipstream to protect us here. Oh! Not flat through there at the moment. Oh, that was a lunge and a half. Jesus. Yeah, wheel spin's not too bad though. Traction's really not bad for the wet. Try and go around the outside here. Ah! Got screwed over by the black and yellow car there. Alright, let's go percent. Come on. Yeah, the AI has no fear whatsoever. Thank you, I'll take that. Gotta be very smooth on the transition from brakes to the coasting phase of the corner.
That's actually a fairly realistic move to real life. I've seen it done before. Here as well, fairly standard. Oh, now these curves really would be way more deadly in real life. Now the line I'm taking now is not too far off the real life wet line, but it's not really making a difference in terms of,
Adios.
Now you can see visually there's some puddling forming on the track. This is really where it gets very dangerous in real life. I mean, you're going to start aquaplaning and you're pretty much just a passenger. The car literally turns into a boat in these type of conditions, but it seems like we still have a fair amount of grip in this rFactor model so far. You can see I'm naturally just taking the wet braking line as well, but I don't think it's making a difference, which really is a shame because that's ultimately what these sims are missing, is some sort of representation of how greasy it is online in the wet. I also don't think any of these puddles are really making much of an effect. I think it's just kind of like a standard rate of grip across the track as the water level's increasing. Oh, this is gonna be sketchy. Again, like if I drive in this puddle, no difference in terms of the drag. In real life, you touch that puddle and you are literally going to feel like you just put the brakes on the car. And that is if you don't spin into the wall. So let me show you what the wet line would be here. I mean, this would be the mid-corner line, basically all the way around the edge on the white line. Some people actually dip two wheels over the white line because there's actually quite a bit of grip off track because, well, nobody drives there. But yeah, it's really not making a difference in terms of any sort of grip performance in this physics model at the moment. Now, Spa is probably one of the tracks I've had the most wet weather experience, at least in terms of race conditions. So I definitely have a pretty good understanding of where the track typically puddles, how the rubber line typically affects the wet weather performance, and so far I wouldn't say it's overly realistic. The only place I'm really scared of is these slow speed corners because there's just no warning when the traction breaks loose in the wet. Yeah, also you try and send the speed on the entries in low speed, and you just get a massive pendulum effect at the rear. A bit too much oversteer on entries. I am running a pretty much default setup, high downforce, so obviously not ideal either. Oh, careful the curbs. Oh. Whew. I don't know what he was up to there. Jesus. And we got it. Car stopped, rotated, nice. Notice how quickly I close up on this car head on entry. The AI is practically stopping at the apex to have a really strong exit. That style is known as V'ing off the corner, which is actually a common technique for real life wet driving, so I found that interesting. Okay, we're in the top 5 now, so we might be able to get this podium at least. Oh my god. Oh. Okay. That was pretty realistic. I mean, I think if I had tried that move in real life, my opponent would have probably done the same thing. Nobody wants to be done around the outside and no name, that's for sure. Oh. The thing is with wet weather driving is your brake points don't actually change that much. It's more minimum speed and kind of how easy it is to pick up traction on exit. Wow, he is struggling. Now the other thing that I don't feel like is being replicated accurately here is tire temperature degradation in the wet. Now in these conditions where it's pretty wet, I mean you probably wouldn't have to deal with any sort of overheating of the wet weather tires, but certainly when it starts drying, that would definitely be an issue. And you end up spending a lot of your time just managing that temperature by driving the car in the wettest part of the track, even though it's technically slower. It just kind of keeps the longevity going through the whole race. Now I have to say these spray effects are pretty cool. It's fairly realistic, but it's not simulating how that spray affects your visor, and that's where you lose most of the visibility. It's because it's not like you have windshield wipers. You have the wind, obviously, to try and beat the water off, but I can promise you it doesn't do a whole lot. The visual effects on the outboard cameras, however, are spot on. What I showed my girlfriend, she actually thought I was watching a real race. Alright, so we're up into P4. Very close to the podium here. Okay. Oh! Yeah, again, like, those curbs basically just feel like the same grip level as the track, which I'm telling you, in real life, you would not be having such a good time. Now, they've gotten rid of pretty much all the AstroTurf, I think, at Spa now, so it's not as deadly as it was once before, but still, yeah. I mean, the curbs, generally, they do get slippery, even with some sort of non-stick surface, or non-slip surface. Okay, so the leader's now 5 seconds ahead. We don't have much time to try and catch up, but I'm gonna push. Oh, oh no! Is that him? Oh no! Oh, I almost did the same thing. Jesus. Also, that traction is just not realistic. I mean, we are sitting at 550 horsepower in this car, and I'm telling you, with this water level, first gear, in a slow speed corner, you are not putting down that much power that easily. You do get a fairly realistic feeling in terms of how the steering weight feels once you get to the mid corner. I mean, it's still heavy as you load up initially, but then once you get to the mid corner, the front grip pretty much dies, and you get this really light feeling on the steering wheel, which encourages you to overslip a bit, but you can get away with it in the wet. So I have to say that's done pretty well so far. I keep taking these wet lines just out of habit, but it's really, I don't think it's actually helping me at all. Okay, we're catching him, Yes, get a good exit. Not great. These AI are just masters on power because they basically have traction control. Oh, slipstream's coming into play here. Let's go for it. Oh wow, he's really coming across to defend. Fair play. Oh, what the? Was he on slicks? I hope not. I hope he wasn't on slicks, because if that's the case, it's super unrealistic, because there's no way. If you see any sort of water level on the track, the slicks are a no-go. I mean, unless there's like a fully dry line all the way down the track. I mean, it's just, trust me, from experience, it's pretty much impossible. Unless you're on the streets of Po, and somehow you manage to keep temperature in the tires. I mean, that's the only experience I have where it's really defied logic. I mean, in terms of realism, I'm going to have to, you know, I think you can already tell it's not realistic. But I have to say, in terms of immersion, it's great. I mean, it's probably the best wet weather experience I've had so far in a video game. So, would it have been beneficial years ago when I didn't know anything about driving in the wet before I came over to Europe? Sort of. Maybe it would have prepared me a little bit more for the lack of visibility. But I'd say in terms of driving technique in the wet, it hasn't really translated so much that I would feel like I really missed out on something. Now, the AI needs to be boosted because this is 100% maxed out everything, and I'm just pretty much destroying them. Oh, just held the clutch in and kept it out of anti-stall. Okay, last lap. Just need to survive it. Now, I don't quite understand why it's not possible to, like, let's say have a greasy rubber line all the way around the track to simulate, or to simulate a higher grip area when the track's actually driving, and to simulate visually what a dry line would look like. I think that should be possible, but I'm not a game developer. I just hope that one day some real effort and attention is put towards it, because I know as a young driver early in my career, it would have been really helpful to have had a way to train for that before I jumped straight into it in real life in competition, and then, you know, and risked actually hurting myself. So hopefully one day that's something the sim racing community will push for. I tell you what, years and years ago, I would absolutely hate this sort of experience of driving in this low grip, having literally no idea what the grip's going to be like in the next corner. But ever since last year, when I really sort of honed my wet weather driving, I find it really relaxing to drive in the wet, to be quite honest. It's something about, you just get into this rhythm, and even though you can't see anything, and you're pretty much purely driving off of pure instinct and feeling, there's something really calming about it when you actually know what you're doing. Oh, I say that, and then I almost spin it on the last lap while in the lead.
Nice.
And across the line, P1 from P20 on the grid. That's one for the history books. So yeah, guys, I hope that was interesting. I hope you learned a little bit about what driving in the wet's really like. It's definitely not been replicated in a game yet, to my standards at least. But yeah, hopefully it's coming in the future, and at the very least, this might be something interesting to try out in VR. Immersion level is definitely there. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you may want to check out this one over here, where I had some absolutely chaotic, but then amazing hard-fought wheel-to-wheel battles with real actual players in iRacing. So definitely check that one out. Anyway, with that all being said, see you guys in the next one.